Sometimes a simple story can reveal a timeless truth. Let's talk about it with Eric Schumacher on Steve Brown, etc.
He's an old white guy, an author, broadcaster, and seminary professor who's sick of religion. And he's brought friends. Please welcome Steve Brown, etc.
Hey, we're so glad you're here. I'm Steve, the aforementioned old white guy, and you always have a place at our table. Matthew Porter is with us. He's the executive producer. He still aspires to be a screenwriter. Hey, Matthew, do you know the difference between a screenwriter and a pizza?
No. What is the difference between a screenwriter and a pizza?
A pizza can feed a family of 4. And our producer, Jinx, is working hard in this little glass booth. Jinx has the hair of Ted Nugent, and he has the politics of, well, Ted Nugent. And our video director and IT guy, John Myers, is in his tech bunker. One day we'll have robots that work for us, but John knows when that day comes, he'll just have an addition to his job description. He will then start fixing broken robots. Dr. George Bingham is the president of Key Life. George likes his donations to Key Life like he likes his coffee. Now, please. And Kathy is the soft feminine side of the program. This week, Kathy made us some fudge packed with vitamin C. The C stands for chocolate, by the way.
Nice,
by the
Matthew.
Way, I didn't like
delicious.
any of this. What, Kathy?
What?
You started to say something.
No, I said that was nice. Matthew sometimes doesn't hit the mark, but that was good. C is for chocolate. Very appropriate. The reason you didn't get any is because you never go to the kitchen to look around.
No,
I've been to the kitchen in a
if
while.
I go to the kitchen to look around, there's often good stuff down there, and if I get close to it, it's over. I'm an addictive personality. I can't quit smoking my pipe. I can't quit cussing, and I don't drink because I know if I started, I wouldn't be able to stop that either. Eric Schumacher, by the way, is our guest, and I think you may know him. He and Elise Fitzpatrick, one of our dear friends, wrote a book together about women's issue, The Worth of Women. Worthy was the name of that book. And I suggested to Eric that he ought to write a book for men, and he said he was. How men handle what, Eric?
How men handle miscarriage.
Yeah. That wasn't exactly what I meant by men's issues, but that'll happen. At any rate, Eric holds a BA in communication and an MDiv from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. He's written a work of fiction, and we don't do fiction on this broadcast. And if we didn't like Eric, we never would have read it.
Well,
Ended up, and Kathy said it's about Alzheimer's. And I said, well, that'll be a real upper. You know, people will just love that kind of book. And then I read it and was blown away with it. And so is everybody else who's read it. Matthew said he was in tears. Kathy was in tears. Jinx doesn't cry, and I don't because I'm a real man, and real men don't cry.
And I cry.
George won't tell us whether he cried or not.
Well, you can obviously guess that I did.
Yeah, George did.
It's true. The name of the book, which I hold in my nicotine-stained fingers, is My Last Name. Eric, Do you just wake up some morning and say, I'm going to write a story that'll blow people away, and you made all this stuff up, created a story out of whole cloth, or was there some background to it?
Well, I did wake up one morning with a character fully formed, and I went and wrote this in about one day. But there's a lot of background to it. Yeah. As a pastor, I've spent a lot of time with people in their last days at deathbeds, visiting widows in care facilities. And I've had a few dear people in my life die from Alzheimer's. So it sort of all came together in this character, Lottie.
We had a friend of mine. He's now in heaven. On 2 or 3 years ago, or maybe longer, and he had Alzheimer's, and it was a very difficult program to edit because staying on subject was very difficult for him. But what he said was profound. And the name of his book, I think, was I'm Beginning to Miss Me. And it was by the way, it was one of the most popular programs we ever did. And I was really surprised at that. What I liked about your book, I mean, there are a lot of things I like about this, and this is not a heavy read. You can read it in a half an hour, 45 minutes, and it, in the end, if you're not affected emotionally, you probably are dead as a doornail, or you didn't read very closely or something, because it's quite moving. I'm not going to tell you the end, but you start with Alzheimer's, and it doesn't often have a happy ending. But if you're a Christian, even Alzheimer's has a happy ending. So, but the good thing about it, I found out, and I think this was a God thing for you, Eric, was that I kind of got in the mind of somebody with Alzheimer's. Where did you get that? I mean, I know that's got to be what they are thinking and how they think it. And you didn't cover any of the raw parts. I mean, you were really honest reporting on this elderly lady in an extended memory care facility, I assume.
Yeah.
Where did you get that?
You know, as a kid, my mom would take me to nursing homes to visit relatives, particularly her, one of her aunts we went to visit who didn't have any living children. And that was my first exposure to someone with any kind of memory issues. She had had a stroke, and without any warning, we walked in to visit Aunt Mary, and she starts telling me about her son, who is in the Air Force, and he flies a jet plane, and he's gone right now because he's flown his jet plane to the moon. And, as a 8-year-old kid, I didn't know what to do with that. And watching my mom care for her with dignity, even while she was making no sense, just started this thinking in me about what's going on in their mind. And, later, I think I was in high school, I visited my great uncle, who was like a grandpa to me, my next door neighbor. And he was in an Alzheimer's unit, and he didn't necessarily know who we were. At times, he didn't know who his wife was when she came to visit him. But he could talk as clearly as possible about his farming and what needed to happen, and his tractor was outside. And it just made me wonder, what is it like to have crystal clear memories of so much of your life, but not be able to know where you are and who you're with? And that idea fascinated me, and it's what I tried to play around with in this story.
And it's good the way you do that. Do you think people with memory issues, dementia, Alzheimer's, are treated with dignity in most situations?
That's one of the reasons I wrote this book, was to highlight the dignity of people with Alzheimer's and dementia, because I'm not sure they are. As a kid, it was easy for me just to think, oh, this is uncomfortable, I want to be out of here. And you find that temptation, I think, as a pastor, and I think family members do. You go to visit someone, and the temptation is to try to correct them on everything they're saying and what they think is going on. And I don't think that's the right approach. I think we need to see this as a person who's created in the image of God, who reflects the glory of God and who they are, and who is suffering from part of what it means to be in a broken world that isn't entirely fixed yet. And so we sit with them in that, and we love them where they're at.
As she relates her story, and it's probably just me, but I felt the best line in the book was when she described her father in very raw. In fact, I don't even know who published this. It was a Christian publisher. I don't know how you got that by the editor, but
it was self-published.
It was what?
Self-published.
Oh, that's
there
how you got it by the editor. But it was, and she's living in another world, and it's one where she grew up, and you are able to follow her story. And the caregivers are quite compassionate. The pastor who visits doesn't know what he's doing, but he's doing his best, so he's got a good heart. But I was going to tell you more than I probably should have told you anyway, but she uses language. I'm tempted to tell you what it was.
Oh, I think you should.
They'll take us off the air if I use it, because this is not a self-broadcast. We got to go. This is a book, and it's in audio form. You can get it. It's called My Last Name. And it's a wonderful story. We'll talk more about the story and the implications of it when we come back. And we are coming back. We're so glad you're with us. You have a place at our table always, and we're talking to pastor, songwriter, maybe we will talk about some of that, and author Eric Schumacher. His new book is a great novella called My Last Name. And by the way, it is available in audio. Where can they get this, Eric?
Anywhere. It's Amazon, Barnes & Noble, local bookstore.
Audio book too.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, good. I was suggesting that there's one line where the language is less than pristine, where the caregiver asks her about her father, and she says he's a mean. And if we had a beep, we would put it right here. And the caregiver doesn't exactly know how to respond to it. And then the lady begins to talk about her father, and you realize, it's worse than she even said. So we'll go. Kathy?
Eric, is Lottie one specific person? Is she a compilation kind of many people? And the reason I asked that question is because, the fact that, and I don't think it matters this part to give away sort of, but I mean, she's married at a very young age, and she loses her husband in the war. And then she has a child. She's already pregnant. And then she marries again. I mean, it sounds like the chronology of a specific person's life as far as those elements are concerned. Whereas maybe, some of the other things could be a compilation of multiple people.
Yeah, that's a great question. She's not a particular person. She's not based on anyone. I guess you could say she's a compilation of many people, but all the stories, the little vignettes of her life in the novella, they're all fictional. They're not based on true stories. But part of how this came about was as I mentioned earlier, I sit with elderly people in care facilities at their deathbeds. I visit them in the hospital. I've done a lot of funerals, and I've become friends with these elderly people. Particularly elderly women have become good friends and sisters in Christ who've encouraged me in the faith and talked about life with me. And I've always thought, I wish I could know their whole story. We know people only in a certain frame of life, a certain section of their movie, the story of their life. I only will ever interact with them as an elderly woman. And it's easy to forget they were once little girls, and they were once teenagers, and they were once a young mom, perhaps a single mom. And they were once, middle-aged people, and their experiences were as real as the experiences I've had, but I don't get to know them there. And so this book was sort of my attempt to help us get to know an elderly character at every point in her life. And part of my hope there was that we would show respect to those in their old age, remembering that they once were like we are now. And if we live long enough, we will be like they are.
I'm dealing with the beginning of this with a dear friend. And one of the things that I've noticed is that, and again, I know you can't make a blanket statement that it's always the same with every person, but at this particular point for her, it appears to be short-term memory things that just slip away from her just like that. Yeah. But if you go back like a long time in the past, she's right there. So in the midst of a conversation on the phone, she can tell me the same thing, sometimes 4 or 5 times. But if I say to her, do you remember when we did such and such? She's right there with it. Mm. And so if I can sort of seem to steer, at least for right now, seem to steer the conversation in that direction, she's just effusive and she's into it, and she doesn't have any problem, and seems to take great joy in remembering those things, which of course the older you get, the more fun it is to remember stuff that happened a long time ago anyway. So have you seen that to be the case as well, or is that just something that's, kind of just sort of particular to this particular individual?
Oh yeah, I've experienced that. In fact, a church I previously pastored, we would go to the nursing home once a month to do a birthday party for all the residents, and we would celebrate whoever's birthday it was that month, and we'd sing hymns, and I'd give a little devotion, and then we'd have ice cream and cake, and I would get to know some of the residents there. And there was a table full of men, and that was typically always the same men. And I'd make my way over to talk to them. And one of them had pretty profound memory issues. And after a year or so of doing this, it became easy to see what stories he loved to tell and what it made him happy to talk about. And, he'd be frustrated if you tried to talk about the present and where we were at now. And so I sort of turned it into, I would guide the conversation so that we would quickly end up on the stuff that he loved to talk about. And I thought, part of it seemed like a game because I could control this conversation, but I really thought this man is hungry for fellowship. He doesn't have any family around. He wants human contact. And what better way to love my neighbor than by helping him have the opportunity to talk and laugh and smile about the things that he loves in his life. And we talked about the same things literally every month, but it brought joy to his life.
Yeah.
Go, Steve.
Matthew, you might want to say something before we get into the break. Eric won't have time to answer, but make a point, and then we'll sell some product and come back.
Yeah, that sounds good. In reading the book, I was struck how, sometimes we can know the facts about God, we can know the facts about the human experience, but somehow not understand them on the proper level. Somehow, something about story sometimes helps us see the truth beyond the facts. And I'll tee that up again on the other side. But that's what I was struck with in reading your book, how you could talk about human dignity, or you could see it brought to life in front of you.
And by the way, Matthew won't say this, but he's an award-winning film director, and he created one that won a number of awards that does exactly what Eric's book does at a deeper level. And that's the only 2 times in my life I cried, your film and Eric's book. And that's it. I ain't doing that anymore. I don't like that story. And guys, we got to back out. These younger people don't need it, but I'm old, so I'm going to have some cookies and milk and a nap. And then we're going to, just like Jesus, we're going to return. And it's our fond hope that you return also. We're hanging out with Eric Schumacher, and you can keep up with Eric at EM Schumacher, but it's spelled funny. Yep. SCHUMACHER.com, and on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at EM Schumacher.
There you go.
Awesome. Eric, before the break, we talked about, I was asking about the kind of the interplay between, did I walk on your line, Steve?
No, I'm just correcting myself because I can.
All right. The interplay between like truth and facts, and that's what hit me when reading the book. So, like for example, in the Bible, like when David messed up, he knew all the facts of what he had done, but he seems unimpacted by it. And then Nathan approaches him, but he doesn't hit him with the facts. He tells him a story about this guy who has one sheep, and then David hears a story and he becomes incensed. And so a made up story. So then he could understand the truth of what it was, but he didn't hit him with the facts. He hit him with the story, and it helped him see the truth that he was blind to because of the familiarity. I just wonder if you'd speak a little bit to the power of story and how it can help us see God's truth in a new way.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation. And, most of the Bible is narrative. It's mostly story. And the way that we are introduced to Jesus is through 4 gospels. We don't get 4 treatises on, a systematic outlining of who Christ is. We get him in story form. And I think we all know, and we've probably all been the person who can tell you doctrinally and show you from the Bible that people are created in the image of God, but the way that we treat people is like complete jerks. And we deny that they're made in the image of God by the way we treat them, because we would never treat God that way, but we're happy to treat his image that way. That really reveals what we think about God in some ways. And so I think people ask me, what I really love to write is fiction. And when people ask me why, I usually say because fiction tells the truth better than nonfiction does. And I think when we see something happen to a person that we care about, whether it's a fictional character that we've grown to love or someone in our life, we suddenly grow sympathetic and we care about issues. I have a friend who he would tell you he would never give a second thought to issues of racial justice or how women are treated. But he went through some profound suffering where he was mistreated and people didn't believe he was being mistreated. And he couldn't get any justice. And then suddenly he says, because this is part of his own story, he can relate to the experience in a small degree to those suffering injustice in our country. And suddenly he says, oh, I want to listen to them. I want to find out their story because I know what it's like to experience injustice and have no one believe me that it's actually happening. And I think that's the importance of telling truth through fiction.
George?
Yeah, Eric, one of the things that I was struck with was the little pieces of the, as part of the story, the interaction with the caregivers. And, what struck me is, my mother was in a assisted living and nursing home for some years. And one of the things that you get very sensitive to is being able to kind of trust those caregivers and how kind, the picture that you gave of these fictional caregivers were to this lady. And it's one of those kind of things that, I think the book would have been like, the story would have been too much for me if you'd given some picture of sometimes what some of the unfortunate situations are. Caregivers are too busy. They may even intend to do the best they can, but too many demands and so forth. And I think it was just a really great picture. And talk about a true calling to be in a role like that and to do it well. Talk about, I don't know how much, we don't have time in this segment, but I'd be interested in your comments on just in terms of visiting and so forth. And I'll throw in one other thought with that. Fortunately for Lottie, she was polite and remembered to thank her caregiver, all the time. And I know that can mean a lot to the caregivers to have somebody who's, appreciative of their efforts. But I'd be interested in any comments along that line after we get back from the break.
Oh, that'll be interesting. Eric Schumacher is our guest, and you ought to get it. You can get it audio. You can get it anywhere where they sell it. And it's a sweet book. You might want to give it away as a gift or make it a part of a discussion in your church. It's called The Last Name, and it's quite moving. And I know when you think Alzheimer's, you think that's not a happy book, but the book really is, and the end of it will absolutely blow you away. If Eric's not nice to me, I'll tell you the end before the end of this broadcast. Hey, don't go anywhere. Hey, you're listening to Steve Brown, etc., and we're so glad you're here. It's been a great hour. We didn't know exactly the way it would go, but I've learned some really cool stuff and have learned some things too. If you use YouVersion Bible Study app, we now have a new Key Life devotional you can check out on said app. It's called When Being Good Isn't Good Enough, and you can get the details at keylife.org/devotional. George?
Yeah, Eric, right before the break, and I was rambling on a little bit, but just ask for your comments about how you pictured the caregivers and the interaction with Lottie, which was really so beautiful in the story.
I think that's a great question. And we know that the story of an Alzheimer's sufferer and their caregivers could take on many different forms. You have a lot of combinations that could happen there. And Unfortunately, we know that not all caregivers are compassionate and kind. And, even in the story, there's a difference between the caregiver that she knows and loves well, and the second one who is just sort of indifferent to what she wants. But we also know, that there's caregivers who abuse victims in care facilities. And as I was saying over the break, I love this character. And you guys were joking about crying or not crying. And I cried when I wrote this, and I still brings tears to my eyes when I read it because I love this character, and I couldn't bring myself to depict an abusive relationship between the caregivers and Lottie. And part of that too was I really hoped to show through the beauty of a good caregiver how important and good it is to give good care. And I think that's hopefully, by God's grace, more effective than showing how awful the abuse could be. Yeah. Because caregivers, they really have their hands full there. And,
with the kind of demands of increasingly in a lot of situations where they have so much more work than they can do, and then still trying to be compassionate and the sense of calling that ideally they have, but it is a very high calling to be in a role like that.
And, if I wrote the story the other way around, if I wrote it from the view of the caregiver, just thinking about the temperament, Lottie is an easy Alzheimer's patient to be compassionate towards. But we know, some folks with Alzheimer's can become violent, insulting, angry, and that just compounds the difficulty of loving this person who really can't help how they're behaving.
We had friends who walked through this with their my friend's father, and he was incredibly healthy up until right at the end. And then it was just a dramatic, and we watched it from afar, but not super far. And as you're going through that, or even if you're just going through what somebody's last chapter is, there's a lot of times where very fairly you can go, why is God letting this happen? This seems cruel. This seems, the quote unquote, the longest goodbye. And so I'll pose this to you, interesting person to answer it as an author and a pastor.
Yeah.
It seems like sometimes maybe God's purpose is your wounds that you're going to carry are your equipment to help other people who are going to be coming through it. It's always going to hurt, and I'm not going to make that better. But what you are now is qualified to hold hands with somebody who's coming behind you, who's going through it. And sometimes just that identification and that empathy makes things a little bit more bearable. Any thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, that's a great observation. And before I get into that, several of you have mentioned having people who've had Alzheimer's. A book that I want to recommend is a book called Second Forgetting: Remembering the Power of the Gospel During Alzheimer's Disease. So that book is Second Forgetting, and it's by Benjamin Mast. And Benjamin Mast is a research professor at the University of Louisville whose specialty is dementia and Alzheimer's. And he's a believer. And so this book is how to remember the gospel as you care for someone who is forgetting.
And sometimes we have a mutual friend. He was a professor at seminary. He's now kind of mucky muck in the Episcopal Church, but his father had Alzheimer's and was anti-religion. And when he became a child in the Alzheimer's state, like a child, he ran to Jesus. And Reggie can't tell that story without crying.
That's beautiful. Yeah. I think, Matthew, what you were saying about, our own wounds and caring for people, I don't know if this is what you're getting at, but I know as a pastor, just experiencing my own suffering in the pastorate, having gone through a pretty brutal church split, and where you weren't listened to, you weren't understood. It made me, it broke me in a lot of ways, from being the academic theologian who wanted to pump out truths to seeing that the gospel, being in step with the gospel, means having compassion for people and showing them mercy and grace. And it made me want to sit with people. And, the thing is an elderly person in a care facility with Alzheimer's who doesn't know what's going on here has, in worldly terms, absolutely nothing to offer you in terms of advancing your career or giving you a platform or making a name for you. They have nothing. And I think the church, it's easy to bypass them, the members in our congregation, because they're not going to help us draw in the cool people. They're not going to advance the name of our church. And so we can just stick them over there. And that Jesus, Diane Langberg, she puts it beautifully. Jesus made himself little. And, Mark chapter 1, his disciples come and say, everybody's looking for you. They want you to minister to them. And he says, yeah, I've got to go to the next city. That sort of platform and leveraging your influence meant nothing to Jesus. And that's how we should think about caring to people.
That is so good. Eric, we're out of time. And I don't know where it went, frankly. You keep writing stuff like this, and you'll become an old friend.
Do I still get my free sins?
Yes, but
that's why I
might borrow one.
Due to inflation, it's only 2 free
You need
cents.
to be on this program more often. You're never going to catch up. But every time you're on, you get
my free last time. He told me to fork them over right when the program was done.
Hey, Eric, thanks for being with us from a busy schedule.
Thank you.
The name of the book is My Last Name. And trust all of us, because we all cried. You'll be moved, and you'll like the happy ending. Hey, we got to back out. We're going to tell you who we're going to do it unto next week, so don't go anywhere. A great hour with Eric Schumacher. That's about what it'll take you to read this book. And it's not expensive. And it's the kind of book you'll want your friends to read and your family members to read. And it's pretty raw in places, not horribly so. And it has an ending that will blow you away. The statistic is 1 in 1. They always say that so many people died if they do this or that. They're all going to die. All of us. You don't get out of this thing alive. But for Christians, that's not the end of the story. And this is a good book. It's a feel-good book. After you read it, you'll be glad that you did. Matthew, when he sent me an email this morning about sending the scripts and all the material that we're going to be dealing with, said this stupid book made me cry. And that's exactly how I felt. I didn't even want to read it. I'm not into reading little books with little stories about little people with Alzheimer's. And when I read it, I found out that was nothing like that. So get it. You'll be glad you did. It'll make you a nicer person. That's why I'm so nice on this broadcast, because I read this book. I mean, it could be worse. A lot worse. Trust me. Kathy,
Well,
who's going to be on next week?
Speaking of being nice, actually, you're dismissed for a week next week.
Oh.
Matthew is hosting. And we've been trying to do this for a while. Bobby Joe Reed and Brent and Donna Jones, who produced and directed the movie about her. And it's a pretty incredible story about this woman. Matthew, you have any tantalizing little things you want to throw out?
Stuff this woman went through, I have never heard. There is no reason she should be alive apart from the fact that God had a plan for her. And this woman is all about following this mission that God has put out for her. It's phenomenal. You got to check it out.
Amazing. Just amazing.
They were supposed to be on before, weren't they?
Yeah, she got sick.
I thought Matthew said something to offend her.
Probably that too.
No.
He doesn't seem easily offended.
No, I don't think so. It's going to be a great program next week. And a story, that means 2 tearjerkers in a row. And I don't have to be here for the second one. I've done enough of this. It's plenty for at least 2 months. Hey guys, we're gone, and most of us are going to be back again, same time, same place. And we hope that you'll be here when we're here. And between now and then, don't do anything we wouldn't. And that gives you a wide, wide berth.